The sun was setting low over the Pacific Ocean when Michael and Sarah packed the last of their bags into their old blue sedan. They were both young, full of life, and filled with dreams of the future. Michael, who worked as an apprentice mechanic, had been saving up for this road trip for almost a year. Sarah, who loved painting and writing in her journal, had been just as excited. For weeks, she spoke about the waves, the winding cliffs, and the freedom of the open road. They chose the Pacific Coast Highway for its beauty, its promise of adventure, and the chance to be together away from the daily grind of their small town life. The Pacific Coast Highway was famous for its breathtaking views. On one side stretched the endless ocean, glittering under the late summer sun, and on the other side rose tall cliffs, sometimes lined with thick forest. Michael drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting gently over Sarah's. They laughed, sang along to the radio, and stopped often to take pictures. At a gas station in Monterey, Sarah bought a disposable camera, saying she wanted to capture every moment. She snapped photos of the sunset, of Michael pretending to pump gas like a movie star, and of their fast food dinner eaten in the car. Their journey seemed ordinary, just like many couples before them who had traveled the same road. Yet small details would later become the last memories anyone would ever see of them. At one diner in Carmel, they spoke to a waitress about the best spots to stop along the highway. They left a tip, smiled warmly, and walked out hand in hand. That same waitress would later tell investigators she remembered them because Sarah had asked if the roads were safe at night. By the time they called their families, it was already dark. Michael phoned his brother to say they were planning to camp near Big Sur, maybe find a spot where the stars were clear. Sarah texted her best friend a photo of the ocean view with a caption that simply read, "This feels like forever." It was the last message anyone received from her. As the hours passed, their families thought little of it. Road trips often meant spotty service, and it was normal not to hear back right away. But the next morning, when Michael did not show up at his brother's house in Santa Barbara as planned, concern began to grow. Calls went unanswered. The phone rang again and again until voicemail took over. Sarah's parents tried reaching her too, but her phone was suddenly out of service. By the evening of the second day, both families were deeply worried. They reported them missing to the local authorities, describing the car, the route, and the last known stops. Police began their standard checks. Patrol cars drove the highway, helicopters flew over cliff edges, and the Coast Guard searched the rocky shoreline for any sign of wreckage. For a moment, it seemed possible the couple had simply taken a detour. But the days stretched on with no word, and hope began to fade. Searchers found a few puzzling clues. Near one of the cliffside overlooks, about an hour south of Carmel, someone discovered a single flip-flop sandal lying in the dirt. Not far from it, a crumpled fast food bag still had the diner's logo. At first, investigators wondered if these belonged to the missing couple. Sarah's family later confirmed that she had been wearing sandals on the trip, but there was no proof it was hers. These small details only deepened the mystery. News of the disappearance spread quickly. Local TV channels ran segments on the couple, flashing their smiling photos across the screen. Newspapers wrote about the young lovers who vanished without a trace on one of America's most scenic roads. The story drew national attention, both for its romantic tragedy and its frightening uncertainty. The Pacific Coast Highway was supposed to be a dream drive, yet for Michael and Sarah it had become a nightmare. For their families, the days after the disappearance were unbearable. Michael's mother stood near the cliff overlook with a candle in her hands, whispering prayers into the salty air. Sarah's father joined search parties, combing through brush and climbing down dangerous slopes with ropes, hoping to find any sign. Volunteers and locals joined in, moved by the story of two young lives cut short or stolen. Still, no car, no bodies, no clear trace appeared. Police officers speculated about what might have happened. Some believed the car had swerved off the highway during the night, plunging into the ocean where the currents would have carried it far away. Others suspected foul play, pointing to the fact that there were no tire marks or skid marks at the likely spots. A few thought maybe the couple had chosen to disappear on their own, though their families refused to believe that. Michael and Sarah had made too many plans, left behind too much love, to walk away from their lives without a word. Weeks turned into months. The official search scaled back, though the families kept pressing for answers. Flyers with their faces were taped to gas station windows, grocery store walls, and pinned to community boards. People across California kept an eye out for the blue sedan, but it was never seen again. The case haunted everyone who worked on it. Detectives said it was as if the highway itself had swallowed the couple whole. Journalists called it a mystery of the coast. Every year, when the anniversary of their disappearance came, small vigils were held. Candles flickered against the ocean wind, families cried quietly, and people wondered how two young lives could vanish without leaving a trace. Though time moved forward, the memory of that night in 2005 lingered. The sound of waves crashing against cliffs carried the weight of unanswered questions. Some nights, travelers on the highway swore they felt uneasy, as if the road remembered what it had taken. Others whispered stories of headlights disappearing around a bend, never to be seen again. But beneath the sadness and fear, a question remained alive: what had truly happened to Michael and Sarah? The mystery did not fade. It only grew stronger with each passing year, waiting for the day when the truth, long buried under earth and water, would finally be revealed. As the months passed after Michael and Sarah's disappearance, the search slowly began to fade. At first, the police worked long hours, combing through every lead, every report, every possible sighting. But when nothing new turned up, the case began to grow cold. For the families, however, the pain remained as fresh as the very first day. Each morning they woke with the same heavy question: where were Michael and Sarah? The absence of answers was worse than any nightmare. The local police continued to run checks, but the highway was long and unpredictable. Cars had gone off those cliffs before, swallowed by the ocean without leaving a trace. Some officers believed that was the most likely answer, a tragic accident, and nothing more. Yet others could not ignore the strange details: the sandal, the missing car, the silence of both phones. Families clung to hope that something, anything, might explain the mystery in a way that would bring them peace. Within a few months, the Federal Bureau of Investigation was asked to review the case. Normally, missing person cases stayed with local authorities, but there were odd pieces that did not fit neatly into the idea of an accident. One of the investigators had noticed an unusual bank transaction. A small withdrawal had been made from Michael's account 2 days after the couple vanished. The amount was minor, but it raised suspicion. Who had made it? Was Michael alive at that time? Or had someone else taken his card? Another strange detail surfaced when a gas station clerk remembered seeing a car similar to theirs the night they went missing. The clerk could not recall much, only that it was dark blue and had driven in quickly before pulling out again without stopping for gas. The timing matched, but nothing confirmed it was their car. Even so, these fragments of information gave the case a shadow of mystery that reached beyond a simple crash. For Sarah's parents, each new lead brought a wave of emotions: hope, fear, and then disappointment when nothing solid came of it. They kept in close contact with the FBI, leaving no stone unturned. Michael's brother often joined the investigators, pushing them to keep the case alive. He believed there was more to the story than anyone realized. Over the years, rumors began to spread among locals. Some said the couple had been victims of a robbery gone wrong. Others whispered about dangerous groups who sometimes used the Pacific Coast Highway to move illegal goods. A few even suggested that the couple had staged their own disappearance to start new lives somewhere else. These whispers were painful for the families, who knew how much Michael and Sarah loved their lives and each other. They would never have left without a word. Time, however, is a cruel test of faith. As years went by, other cases captured the headlines, and Michael and Sarah's story was pushed aside by newer tragedies. But for those who loved them, the search never truly ended. Their families held vigils every year, standing with candles at the same overlook where some of their belongings had been found. People came to support them, neighbors and strangers alike, touched by the heartbreak of two young lives cut short without explanation. Detectives who had once worked on the case retired, handing over boxes of files to new officers. Inside those files were photos of the couple, witness reports, maps marked with red ink, and endless pages of interviews. Many of those who had joined the original search could still recall the sight of the blue sedan plastered across television screens, the smiling faces of the couple who had simply vanished. They spoke about it as a puzzle with missing pieces that no one could ever fit together. Through all this, the FBI kept the file open. Cold cases like these rarely saw breakthroughs, but the Bureau knew better than to shut the door completely. Technology was improving each year. New tools were becoming available to analyze evidence in ways that had not been possible back in 2005. All it would take was one discovery, one overlooked clue, to breathe new life into the case. Sarah's diary was often remembered by her parents. She had always kept one, writing about her thoughts, her dreams, and her adventures. But the diary she had taken on the road trip was never found. This troubled her mother deeply, who believed that if the diary could be recovered, it might reveal the last feelings Sarah had before she vanished. That hope never left her heart. Meanwhile, Michael's brother started his own small investigation. He followed tips, spoke to locals, and even tracked online forums where amateur sleuths discussed the case. Some of them speculated that a dark-colored SUV had been following the couple, based on a witness who thought they had seen something suspicious. The detail remained uncertain, but it was enough to spark theories. Why would anyone be following them? Was it coincidence, or was there a darker truth hidden on that highway? The case slowly became a legend. Travelers passing through the Pacific Coast Highway would sometimes hear the story of the young couple who disappeared. Tourists would stop at the overlooks, gazing out into the wide, endless ocean, and wonder how two people could vanish without leaving behind even a single clear answer. It became part of the strange, haunting history of the Costa Road, as beautiful as it was merciless. As the years turned into more than a decade, grief weighed heavily on the families. Sarah's father grew older, his health fading, but he never stopped hoping that someday the truth would come out. Michael's mother kept a candle by her window, lit every night for her son. Both families met often, bound together by loss, their shared pain making them almost like one family. They spoke of memories, told stories, and imagined what Michael and Sarah would be like if they had lived. Would they be married now? Would they have children? These questions had no answers, only aching silence. Despite the quiet, the FBI agents who still had access to the file never closed the door completely. They believed, quietly, that something remained hidden, waiting to be found. But 18 years is a long time. Many thought the truth might never surface, buried forever by the waves or the soil. The Pacific Coast Highway kept its secrets well. Each twist and turn carried the memory of that night in 2005. To some, the road itself seemed cursed, holding the stories of lives lost to its cliffs and sharp turns. Yet for Michael and Sarah's families, it was not the road but the unanswered questions that hurt the most. The thought that someone, somewhere, might still know what happened gnawed at them constantly. Uncertainty was the cruelest part of all. It left no closure, no peace, only endless wondering. For years, the families lived with this shadow, clinging to each other, holding on to every rumor, every theory, every whisper of hope. They did not know that one day, almost 2 decades later, a storm and a landslide would break the silence of the coast. They did not know that nature itself would reveal what humans could not find. And when that day finally came, it would shake not only the families but the entire country, proving that the truth, no matter how long it takes, has a way of finding its way back into the light. 18 years after Michael and Sarah vanished, most people had stopped expecting answers. Their families still held on to hope, but the case had faded into the background of countless other unsolved mysteries. Then, one winter in 2023, a violent storm swept across the Pacific Coast Highway. Rain pounded the cliffs for days, and the ocean waves crashed with a force so strong that parts of the road crumbled. The storm shook loose earth that had clung stubbornly to the cliffs for decades, and in the process, something hidden deep below began to show itself. A group of hikers passing through Big Sur after the storm noticed something unusual at the bottom of a steep ravine. Among the broken branches and sliding mud, they saw a glint of metal. At first, they assumed it was just scrap left behind from old construction. But as they moved closer, they realized it looked more like the frame of a car. The shape was twisted, rusted, and almost buried under dirt, but one thing was clear: it had been there for a very long time. The hikers took photos on their phones and reported the sighting to local authorities. Within hours, deputies were at the site. They carefully peered down the ravine and confirmed that it was indeed a vehicle, one that matched the description of cars from the early 2000s. Immediately, the memory of Michael and Sarah's disappearance came rushing back. The location was not far from where their last belongings had been found years earlier. When the FBI was contacted, the case that had sat cold for nearly 2 decades suddenly stirred back to life. Teams of investigators and forensic experts were sent to the site. The area was dangerous, with unstable cliffs and loose rocks. Rope teams had to climb down carefully, carrying equipment to recover whatever remained of the vehicle. The sight they found left them silent. The car was almost completely hidden under layers of earth, vines, and roots. Time had turned it into part of the landscape, a secret buried by nature itself. One investigator brushed away dirt from the bumper, and there, barely visible under rust and scratches, were the faint numbers of a VIN plate. The plate was carefully photographed, and back at the station, it was run through the database. Moments later, confirmation came. The VIN matched Michael and Sarah's missing blue sedan. After 18 years, the car had been found. News spread quickly. Reporters gathered near the highway, broadcasting live as the car was pulled out piece by piece. Families were contacted immediately, and though the call was painful, it also brought something they had long prayed for: answers. Michael's mother wept when she heard, clutching a photo of her son. Sarah's father whispered a prayer of thanks, even as his heart broke anew. For years they had lived in limbo, and now, at last, there was proof of what had happened. The FBI did not stop at just recovering the car. They knew that inside could be the key to unlocking the entire mystery. Forensic teams wore protective gloves and masks as they opened the rusted doors. The interior was damp and decayed, but still recognizable. There were fragments of cloth, broken glass, and personal items scattered about. Every piece was carefully collected and catalogued. Among the items were 2 wallets, both damaged but still containing identification cards. Michael's driver's license, faded but intact, confirmed the truth no one wanted to face. Sarah's purse, with her library card and a few coins, was recovered too. There was also a disposable camera with its film still inside, sealed in a case that had somehow survived all those years. Investigators knew immediately that the photos on that roll could be priceless. What struck everyone most was the silence that surrounded the discovery. The ravine was peaceful now, the storm clouds gone, the waves crashing below as if nothing unusual had ever happened. Yet beneath that silence was the weight of 18 years of questions, and for the first time, it felt as though the answers were within reach. The recovery took several days. Large cranes and special equipment had to be brought in to pull the wreck from its resting place. Crowds of onlookers gathered along the highway, watching with solemn faces as the car was lifted, piece by piece, from the earth. For many, it felt like a chapter of history reopening before their eyes. Back at the forensic lab, the car and its contents were examined in detail. Technicians discovered signs of a violent impact, suggesting the car had swerved sharply before crashing into the ravine. But the angle seemed strange. It was not the kind of crash caused by simple driver error. Investigators wondered if something or someone had forced the car off the road. The disposable camera was rushed to specialists. With great care, the film was developed. What appeared shocked the FBI. The photos showed snapshots of the couple's last moments on the trip, smiling at the gas station, eating at the diner, and laughing on the roadside. But in the background of some of the images, investigators noticed something troubling. A dark SUV appeared more than once, parked near them in different locations. At first, it seemed like coincidence. Yet the pattern suggested the SUV was following them. The camera also contained a final, blurry image. It showed headlights behind them on the highway at night, too close, too bright. Investigators stared at the picture, realizing that Michael or Sarah had likely taken it in fear, trying to capture proof of what was happening. The discovery shifted the entire direction of the case. This was no longer simply about an accident. The FBI now had reason to believe the couple had been followed on the night they disappeared. Whether the SUV forced them off the road or frightened them into swerving was still unclear. But what was certain was that they had not been alone in those final hours. Families were called back for another meeting. The FBI shared some of the findings, careful not to reveal too much until everything was confirmed. Sarah's mother broke down when she heard about the camera, whispering that her daughter had always loved writing and recording life, and even in her final moments, she had tried to leave behind a clue. Michael's brother clenched his fists, angry that the truth had been hidden for so long, but grateful that the mystery was finally unraveling. The public followed every development with growing interest. News anchors spoke of it as one of the most significant cold case breakthroughs in recent years. The photos from the camera were never shown publicly, but rumors spread about the shadowy SUV and the possibility of foul play. People who had once believed it was just a tragic accident began to question that belief. The FBI promised to investigate further. They had new technology now, tools that could enhance old photos, trace vehicle records, and connect patterns across years of data. The dark SUV was their new target. Somewhere, buried in old files, witness statements, or surveillance records, the truth about that vehicle waited to be uncovered. The Pacific Coast Highway, which had carried so many secrets for so long, had finally given up one of its mysteries. But instead of closing the story, the discovery only opened new doors, revealing shadows that had been hiding just out of sight for nearly 2 decades. And as investigators looked closer, they began to suspect that the couple had not only been victims of an accident. They may have been caught in something much larger, something that had remained hidden all those years, waiting for the right moment to come to light. The car that had been hidden for nearly 2 decades was now under bright lights inside a secure forensic garage. Investigators worked in silence, each movement careful, as if disturbing the evidence might erase the fragile truth it carried. The air was heavy, filled with a mix of rust, salt, and damp earth that had clung to the vehicle since it had rested at the bottom of the ravine. Inside the car, they found more than just scraps of cloth and faded wallets. Between the broken seats, in a compartment that had somehow remained shut all these years, lay Sarah's travel bag. When an officer opened it, the room fell quiet. Inside was her journal, its pages water-damaged but still readable in many places. She had always been someone who wrote down her thoughts, and even on this trip, she had continued to record everything. The pages revealed small details of their journey, the laughter at the diner, the breathtaking views, Michael's jokes about being a professional road trip driver. But as the entries reached their final days, the tone changed. Her handwriting grew tighter, the words shorter. She wrote about a black SUV they had seen again and again. First at the gas station, then outside the diner, and later, even parked near one of the overlooks. Sarah noted how Michael had tried to laugh it off, saying maybe it was just another traveler taking the same route. but she admitted she felt uneasy, as though eyes were always watching them. One chilling line caught the attention of investigators. She wrote, "We feel like someone is following us. If anything happens, remember the black SUV." It was the kind of note no one could ignore. The FBI immediately treated it as a key piece of evidence, proof that the couple themselves had sensed danger before the crash. Alongside the journal were other belongings. A small makeup pouch, a hairbrush, and a bundle of receipts from their stops along the way. Each item confirmed their path, but also built a picture of two young people who had been careful, documenting their trip like any excited couple would. None of it suggested they had planned to disappear. Everything pointed toward a normal trip that turned dark because of something or someone they could not escape. The disposable camera film, once developed, had already shown the SUV in the background of their photos. But now, with Sarah's journal supporting that evidence, the FBI was convinced the couple had been chased. Specialists enhanced the images from the film, bringing out details that were not clear before. The SUV's headlights, its shape, and even partial markings became more visible. Slowly, a picture formed of a vehicle that might have belonged to someone tied to organized crime along the coast during that time. Investigators also studied the wreck itself. The car's damage showed signs that were not consistent with a normal accident. The impact angle suggested the vehicle had been forced off course. There were deep dents along the side of the sedan, dents that looked like they came from another car slamming into it. The more they studied it, the less it looked like a tragic mistake and the more it resembled a deliberate act. Forensic experts recovered more items. A set of car keys was still in the ignition, rusted but intact. A phone, broken and water damaged, was found under the passenger seat. Though technology from 2005 was difficult to recover after so many years, some fragments of its data remained in the memory chip. One of those fragments was a half-complete draft of a text message. It read, "Someone is," before cutting off. Investigators stared at the screen, chilled by the thought that Sarah or Michael had tried to send a warning in their final moments. The families were called in again, this time shown parts of the recovered evidence. Sarah's mother held the journal with trembling hands, brushing over the faded ink of her daughter's words. She whispered that her daughter had always been brave, even in fear, and now her voice was speaking across time to reveal the truth. Michael's brother clenched the rusted keys in his palm, as if holding on to a piece of his sibling's last moments. The discoveries brought pain, but they also brought clarity, ending years of doubt and silence. The public, too, followed the story with growing intensity. News channels replayed footage of the car being lifted from the ravine, paired with dramatic headlines, "New evidence found in cold case" and "Journal suggests couple was being followed." Social media buzzed with theories. Some believed it was connected to smuggling operations known to use the coastal roads in the mid-2000s. Others speculated it might have been a personal grudge or a random act of road rage. The truth was not yet clear, but what mattered was that after so many years, the couple's story was no longer just an unanswered question. The FBI pushed forward. They compared the SUV in the photos with records from 2005, narrowing it down to a model commonly used by groups moving contraband along the coast at the time. Old surveillance files were pulled from storage, and names of suspects once dismissed were suddenly relevant again. One lead came from an old police report filed in the same year as the disappearance. A fisherman had reported being run off a coastal road late at night by a black SUV speeding recklessly. At the time, it had been brushed off as a random incident. Now, with the context of Sarah's journal and the photos, it looked much more significant. Investigators also interviewed former members of a criminal ring that had operated in the area during 2005. Some admitted that certain SUVs were used to escort vehicles carrying illegal shipments. If an outsider happened to notice too much, they could be followed or intimidated. The possibility that Michael and Sarah had unknowingly crossed paths with such activity grew stronger. Despite the grim nature of the findings, the families finally felt closer to the truth. For years they had lived with uncertainty, torn between hope and despair. Now, even though the answers were painful, at least they no longer lived in the dark. Sarah's father said in an interview that the hardest part had been not knowing, and now, thanks to his daughter's words in her journal, he knew she had tried to leave behind a clue for them. Still, one question loomed larger than ever: who had been in that black SUV, and why had they forced the couple off the road? The evidence suggested more than a random accident. It hinted at something far more deliberate. The Pacific Coast Highway had revealed a hidden truth, but not the full story. The pieces were finally coming together: the journal, the photos, the dented car, the broken phone. Each one whispered the same message: the couple had been chased, cornered, and pushed beyond escape. The FBI prepared to release an official statement, not only to update the families but also to appeal to the public. They needed people who had driven that same stretch of road in 2005, people who might remember a black SUV, to come forward. They also needed those who had once lived in the shadows of organized crime to speak. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, the mystery was no longer cold. It burned with new fire, fueled by the voices of the past and the determination of the present. What had once seemed like a tragic accident was now unfolding into a story of pursuit, danger, and a secret that had waited years to be uncovered. The FBI's announcement about the discovery of Michael and Sarah's car spread like wildfire. For days, news stations, newspapers, and social media platforms spoke of little else. The public was gripped not only by the tragedy of the couple's fate but also by the eerie possibility that they had been chased to their deaths. The evidence from Sarah's journal, the photographs of the SUV, and the dented car all pointed to something darker than a simple accident. Everyone wanted to know who had been behind that black SUV. Inside FBI headquarters, investigators pored over old records from 2005. Files that had been gathering dust were reopened, cross-checked, and scanned into modern databases. Technology that hadn't existed nearly 2 decades earlier was now available to pull out details that had once been invisible. Old highway surveillance, long blurry and useless, was digitally enhanced. License plate recognition software, which hadn't existed at the time, began picking up faint traces of numbers on vehicles recorded along the Pacific Coast Highway that same week. One breakthrough came from an old toll camera farther south. After hours of digital reconstruction, investigators managed to confirm part of a license plate from a dark SUV that matched the one in Sarah's photos. The number led them to a vehicle once registered under a man who had ties to a smuggling ring active in California in the mid-2000s. This man had been on the FBI's radar years ago, but he had disappeared into obscurity when the ring collapsed. Now, his name was back in the files, a ghost from the past resurfacing. Agents followed this lead relentlessly. They discovered that the smuggling ring had used the Pacific Coast Highway as a corridor for transporting illegal shipments between hidden coastal docks. The SUV wasn't just a random vehicle. It had been part of the operation, one of several cars used to patrol the roads and ensure that outsiders didn't stumble across their activities. If someone did notice too much, intimidation was a common tactic. And in Michael and Sarah's case, it seemed the intimidation had gone too far. Interviews with former associates of the ring painted a disturbing picture. Several admitted that in 2005, they heard about a problem on the coast involving a young couple in a blue sedan. No one had ever admitted what happened to them, but whispers suggested the SUV had run them off the road. For years, it had remained an unspoken secret among those involved. But now, with the FBI reopening the case, some were willing to talk. The investigators pieced the timeline together. Michael and Sarah had likely noticed something suspicious at one of the stops, perhaps a meeting or a transfer of goods. The SUV began tailing them, trying to scare them away. But when they kept driving, maybe not even realizing what they had witnessed, the chase grew more aggressive. The dents on the side of the car told the rest of the story. The blue sedan had been pushed, whether intentionally or recklessly, until it lost control and plunged into the ravine. The families were told of these findings in private meetings. It was both heartbreaking and relieving. Heartbreaking because the truth confirmed their worst fears that their loved ones had been chased and terrorized. Relieving because after so many years of darkness, they finally had answers. Sarah's father said through tears that he could finally let his daughter rest, knowing she had not vanished without explanation. Michael's mother said she felt her son's voice had been heard, even if it had taken nearly 2 decades. The FBI moved quickly to track down surviving members of the smuggling ring. Some had scattered, some had gone into hiding, and a few had already passed away. But a handful were still alive, living quietly with new identities. With the weight of fresh evidence and testimony, the FBI made arrests. Those who had long thought the past was buried suddenly found themselves facing charges related to the deaths of Michael and Sarah. The news stunned the nation. For 18 years, the story had been a mystery, a haunting legend of the Pacific Coast Highway. Now it was revealed as something far more chilling, a crime that had been buried under dirt and time. People across the country felt sorrow for the couple, admiration for the families who had never stopped searching, and relief that justice, though delayed, was finally moving forward. The trial that followed brought even more details into the light. Witnesses confirmed the SUV's role, and forensic experts presented the car, the photos, and Sarah's journal as evidence. Every page, every image, painted a clear picture of what had happened that night. The defense tried to argue it had been an accident, that the SUV had not intended to force them off the road. But the pattern of intimidation, the dents, and the testimony of insiders made it impossible to deny the truth. For the families, sitting through the trial was painful. They had to relive every detail of the night their loved ones disappeared. But it was also necessary. With each day, with each piece of evidence, they felt closer to closure. When the final verdict came guilty, the courtroom fell silent, and then tears flowed. Justice had taken 18 years, but it had finally arrived. Even after the trial, the memory of Michael and Sarah lived on. Documentaries were made, books were written, and the Pacific Coast Highway became not just a symbol of beauty but also a reminder of the hidden dangers that once lurked along its cliffs. Travelers who passed through Big Sur often stopped at the overlook where the couple's belongings had once been found. Some left flowers, some left candles, and some simply paused in silence, honoring 2 lives cut short. The families chose to create a memorial near that spot. A simple plaque with their names, surrounded by wildflowers, overlooking the ocean they had loved so much. It became a place of peace, where the sound of the waves carried not just sadness but also remembrance. Sarah's mother often visited, sitting quietly with her daughter's journal in her lap. Michael's brother sometimes stood there, gazing at the horizon, whispering the things he wished he could have told his sibling. The case also changed the way law enforcement handled similar disappearances. The use of modern technology to reopen old cases became more common, with investigators realizing that time did not always mean defeat. Sometimes, nature or progress revealed what had once been hidden. The story of Michael and Sarah inspired other families of missing loved ones to keep hope alive, believing that answers could still be found, even after decades. In the end, what the FBI uncovered was unbelievable, not because it was impossible, but because it showed how long the truth can remain buried and how powerful persistence can be. A storm had broken open the earth, but it was the determination of families and investigators that brought justice to light. Michael and Sarah's story closed with both tragedy and triumph. They were gone, but their voices had not been silenced. Through a camera, a journal, and the love of those who refused to forget, the truth had survived. The Pacific Coast Highway had held their secret for 18 years, but it could not hold it forever. And as the waves continued to crash against the cliffs, the story of the couple who vanished lived on, not as an unsolved mystery, but as a powerful reminder that even in the darkest places, truth has a way of rising to the surface.